So, what holds us back from being the leader of transformation that we're capable of being? Our guest this week is Adrian Kaler. He was here a few weeks ago with us. We had an amazing conversation in episode 467, and he talked about his personal leadership journey as well as his diverse background, supporting families in crisis as a pediatric care specialist to coaching murderers in prison and top executives and everybody in between. And I just love that conversation so much, but we kind of ran out of time. So he is back to continue this conversation and go deep and talk about what it means to hug the cactus. So I'm looking forward to this. Adrian, welcome back.
Thank you, Nicole. You know, a lot of people always say, we should have you back again, but you're one of the very few that's like, okay, let's schedule it. I'm like, yes, that's great.
Yeah, let's do it. Absolutely. Now, one thing I did forget to do last time, which I do want to make sure we do this time, is do a shout out to Podcast Virtuoso, because they're the ones that introduced us. So, if it wasn't for amazing booking agents and people that refer amazing guests, then, I'd be out there, or our team would be out there looking for those guests. But, we have such a great roster of clients that we get to work with and guests. And so thank you to Podcast Virtuoso for them, because they made this conversation possible. So
and specifically we work with Tia from that team.
Yes.
She's done great. I don't work with her directly. She works with Chad on my team, but she's been just delivered. So thanks, Tia.
Awesome. So last time we talked, we ran out of time, like I said, because we were getting into it just as it got really good. We were talking about creating the space for difficult conversations, because I know that you love having those difficult conversations with leaders and challenging people. So,
I'm such a weirdo.
Yeah. You like it tough, right? Why take the easy route? So you point out that the leader either contributed or allowed whatever is going on, and then you kind of get them from victim to responsible. So tell us a little bit more about that process.
Yeah. Oh, the process of getting them from the victim to responsible.
Yeah. Because, I don't know about you, but a lot of times people are like, I'm good, I got this, or it's their fault. And they're so stuck in that, that mindset. And for you to get them to see it differently, sometimes it takes a little bit.
Well, for the most part, so it's, first off, it's like rough to do it because the human being loves to be a victim. I mean, there's like so many savory, delicious, if you will, hidden payoffs to playing the victim. And so it's tough to do it. And Freud, God bless him, he convinced us it was so, that I am etiological. I am the result. Other things, other people, history was the cause, right? So we just kind of stand as the result of, and people say it, even like leadership guru people say, you are the sum total of all your decisions. Really? Do we really want to believe that? I mean, people just, like that on Facebook, or I haven't been on Facebook in a long time, Instagram or LinkedIn. It's like, oh yes, I am the subtotal. Like, really? I mean, people don't think about what they say very often. So first off, you're going to go against the flow if you invite people into a brand new way of looking at a very common, socially accepted way of looking at things. And it's archetypical. It's like since the beginning of time as well. Even some, no matter what people believe about some of the ancient scriptures, this came up early, like the first story of two people hanging out in a garden, figuring stuff out. Things go sideways. They start pointing fingers immediately. The man blames the woman blames the dark forces, and here we are. So anyway, from the beginning of time, human beings have been looking for a reason outside of themselves why things are the way they are. And it makes sense, right? So we don't need to get into all that why it makes sense, because everybody on listening to this is smart. So first off, it's tough. Second is I always start anything by looking at results. So, and in this, two things come up to me. One is there's external results and then internal results. So if someone's got some kind of victim story of this is happening, it's not my fault, it's the other person, or it's the market, or it's the government, or it's the client, or it's the whatever, it's something out there, situational, maybe like the it of the problem, or there's the you of the problem, someone else, or even it's the me of the problem, like, oh, I do that, and I've been doing that. I'm a procrastinator. I am scared of conflict. Whatever story you have of yourself, that's also an external thing, right? Like I don't get to go back and change what happened when I was 8. So now I'm a victim of that, right? Or my, how I reacted to my parents, or blah blah blah, or the crappy, decision I made, 10 years ago. Whatever that is, that's all externalized. I want them to look at results. So I will take that worldview that they're trying to sell me, that they've sold themselves on, and then they're trying to naturally enroll me in their own view. That's when we tell some kind of story about why something is the way it is. We're always trying to enroll other people in our view of things, even if it's not that great. I want to take that. Okay, great. I'll agree with them. I hear what you're saying. Now let's play this out over the next year. What happens in reality if it stays the way you say it is?
Same thing's going to continue to happen.
And you give a long pause, right? And they got to think, they've not been thinking about that because they are creating the story to satiate their own internal character and dilemma that they find themselves in now. The victim story is to satisfy the moment. And we don't look at the victim story as an investment in the future. So if they're willing to, it takes courage to say, okay, if I stay this way, like this worldview, this perspective, this framework, this belief system, this filter, whatever you want to look at, if I stay this way, how bad's it going to get? It's going to get really bad. It will, because now I don't have control over anything. I can't influence anybody. It's just, I'm at risk of being really hurt, of being betrayed, of, something outside of me running my life. And then I naturally, things get bad in the future. So I want to look at external results. So this is answering the question of how do I get them out of it? First off, I'm going to start there, thinking about what's coming if I keep this up. That's external results. I also want them to notice internal results. So when you tell that story, when you live that way, because we are our stories, right? Like we become the stories we tell. So if I tell this story about why it happened and it's not me, it's them, an old me, whatever, I want them to pay attention to that effect internally for me because, and this is what we do in prison is we have them tell, I don't know if I said this in the last podcast. Did I tell you about the exercise?
No.
On the last podcast, I'll do it in a minute. So we have, so for the listeners, we're painting, so here's the picture. Me and my team, we're in prison. We're 30 murderers, all lifers. And the crux of this training, we do this 3D leadership training, and the crux of it is this exercise. It's called Victim Responsible. So we have them sit in pairs, and we say, all right, so you've got 2 minutes to tell your story from life up until now about what made it the way it is. And then we talk about what it means to be the victim. And we talk about that, what it means to be the victim. And some of us are authentically victimized, like we are taken advantage of, we are hurt, all that kind of stuff. That's good. That's not being the victim, playing the victim. I want to talk about what that is. Like you don't have any responsibility, you're weak, you're small, blah, blah. So now we have them tell those stories first, and then we have them tell it as the absolute victim. So you tell these 3 stories, just normal, whatever that is. And then we say, okay, what's a victim? And now person A, you're going to tell person B the exact same stories, but your job in this exercise is to convince the other person that you're the victim. So you got to lay it on thick. You got to be really dramatic. Still tell the truth, but you got to prove it. Prove it to them that you had nothing to do with what happened. And they tell those stories. And it's loud, and it's animated, and it's fascinating, and people are laughing, and people are crying, and people, it's whatever, all that. And then we pause, and we say, great, now let's gauge your experience. What did it feel like when you laid it on thick and they felt angry, they felt small, they felt powerless, they felt resentful, they felt like they wanted to disappear, they felt violent, blah, blah, blah. There's all this emotional return on investment of the story they were telling, and it's all really bad. Or not desirable, not comfortable at all. Then we have them tell the exact same story, same 3 stories about what made their life as it is up until now, how they got into prison. But now their job is to convince the other person that they're responsible. So same stories, but now their job is to convince the listener that they're responsible. So usually have to go back in time a little bit, so it's not like, sure, there was this gang fight and you had guns and blah, blah, blah. But when did I enter the gang? Why did I make that decision? You know, I could have lived at my grandma's house, or I could have lived with my buddy Snooky. I decided to go live with Snooky instead of live with my grandma. You know, they got to go back in time to get responsible for all the decisions they made to then. And then they got to convince the other person that they are responsible. Nobody else did this to me. I did this to myself. And then we have them gauge the experience. And it's actually extremely peaceful. It's extremely grounded. There's no anger in it. There's actually some grace and some understanding in it and some calm, and they're done fighting about it. Because once I decided to get here, there's no one else to beat up. Now it's just me. It's like, okay, I can be hard on myself, or I can just own it. And so when I talk about results, there are different results, distinct results, when you choose to live responsibly, because you live in responsible stories about reality. And I have them pay attention to that, because they're usually very frantic. When I'm talking to someone who's a high-powered person, they're very victimized, they're angry, they're conniving, they're political, they're, having to look over their back, they're, very criminal, like somebody that's in the middle of a very risky enterprise. But if I'm responsible, I end up becoming a stand for something. Like, I'm forward thinking, like, oh, no, I own all my stuff, and I'm really clear about the future, and whatever somebody else is doing, I can start with them wherever they are. I might have to fire them. I might have to get them out of here. I might have to reconcile. I might have to seek forgiveness. I might have to do something. But it's always like really clear on what's next if I'm responsible, because I'm standing for something. Like, no matter, it's kind of like that. We use that imagery of like the big boulder in the middle of the river, right? Of the stream. Like, a stand is like that. If I'm standing against the current, and if you're responsible, you are standing against the current, because culture is irresponsible naturally. If I'm standing against the current, I naturally generate an eddy behind it, right? There's peace in the water right behind me. And if you're a leader and you want to generate trust and love and support and challenge and vigor and all those things, you must create the space for that on your team. But it comes from the way you are in your story with the team. And so once they pay attention to external results and then really give themselves enough space, because we don't do it, give themselves enough space on entertaining the idea that I could be with this circumstance in a very distinct way, some new way. Most people won't do that because they feel like they're betraying themselves, because they are. They've been telling a really crappy story for a long time, and all of a sudden they'll have to disagree with the thing they were so adamant about, right? Like, if they've got a grudge against somebody, they got to put that down. Because there's no room for grudge if I'm responsible. There's no room for it. It just doesn't fit in the math. So you have to like betray your lesser self, which ironically is a very pride-driven conversation. Like, how could I can't admit that I was wrong, but if I decide to say, you know what, I was wrong about that. And it wasn't all on me, but these components, man, that was me. And please forgive me for that. And all of a sudden that's over, and it pulls them into, like, it opens up the field, if you will, opens up the space for new possibilities of action, of speaking that's generous, of anything that's productive. It opens up that field, opens up the future in that way. So how do I get people to shift? I get them to experience the shift. And from a responsible place, the future is a lot more clear. And I tend to trust myself. If I'm in a victim story, I don't trust anybody, including myself. But if I'm in a responsible story, I could have done, and I've got plenty of stories that would take the paint off the wall of how I've blown it like bad. Like, I lived a double life for several years. Anyway, really bad. And we can get into that if you want. But if I'm responsible for it, I don't have any room for shame. I do have a little bit of regret, back there somewhere, but I can't go relitigate. But I'm unapologetic about, yep, that's what I did. That's the decision I made. Yep, that's me. And what's next? Even somebody else's opinion of you, you can understand why they'd have the opinion of you. You just don't have theirs. And they're going to hold back the relationship because of what happened and blah, 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 but you don't. And we're all dying for that. I mean, that's, I think, what people call confidence these days. They look at confidence like a set of emotions. I say confidence is fruit of integrity. Like, when I'm keeping my word to myself. And if I don't keep my word to myself, I will not have integrity, and I won't have confidence. So confidence is a byproduct of a committed way of being.
I love that, because oftentimes people will say, I need to build my self-confidence. And it's like,
right.
Okay, well, where do you not trust yourself? Where are you out of integrity with yourself?
Right on.
Because you don't even believe yourself. How do you expect
Mhm.
anybody else to believe you or to feel confident about what you're actually saying or saying you're going to do
Right
when
on.
inside you're going, no, you're not. No, you're not
Yep.
going to do that. Last time you did
Yep.
this, blah, blah, blah. Very powerful. And a lot of times
Yeah.
we're trying to get confidence. I was thinking about this whole time we were talking about this, couple of questions, which I'll put out here. The first one is, how important is the why behind it? Because a lot of times I think that therapists and counselors, they want to get into the why you made that decision, why all those things happened. And
Mhm.
so talk about the importance or lack of that, because I didn't hear that in what you were
Yep.
talking about. The other thing is identity, right? Is like,
Yep.
what is our identity wrapped up? If our identity is wrapped up in this victim, is in what I believe to be true about myself, and now all of a sudden now you're taking it away, well, what have you got?
Yeah. Well, I'm annoying to a lot of people because I don't care about their why.
Yeah.
I mean, the purpose of that is very
Yeah.
etiological, right? It's the Freudian view instead of an Adlerian view. So the purpose of the why is, if I really understood why I did what I did, then I wouldn't have done it. But I don't think any of us are that dumb. I mean, the math on, I mean, I
Yeah. It just
typically say to
allows
people,
us to loop.
yeah, it's just another waste of time, walking around the same cul-de-sac. Like, I get it, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And by the way, it's not complex. It's never complex. They want some kind of deep-seated, complex reason why, because then I think it would justify all their decisions, but it's
Yeah.
not. It's mostly always survival, look good and feel good and be right, be in control. It's almost always one of those four, if not all of them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's I interrupt folks all the time, and I'm like, hey, the answer is really simple, man. If I would say it like this: if the answer was simple, what do you think the answer is? And it's always something very, okay, good. Okay, we did that part. You figured out your why. Now, what's next?
Yeah.
So I don't care about their why. I'll care if I'm just getting to know someone. I'll listen to their why because that's what they think is up. But I'm going to get them in a whole new conversation because they could go sit in a therapist chair and figure that out. But I'm committed to their future, not like fully understanding their past. Because anyway, we're all
I
pretty
love that.
inauthentic as human beings
Yeah.
anyway. So
Yeah.
it doesn't matter. Now, to your other point is being. There's an aspect that we didn't originate in our work. We come from a long line of phenomenologists, quote unquote, the human potential movement in the 70s in California and blah, blah, blah. And so this framework really originated with some of those thinkers like a Werner Erhard, those types. But at the end of our training, which we've got coming up, it'll have happened by the time this publishes, probably the last day of this training. We'll get up and do a chart. And I'll do this in 30 seconds. Natural human thinking goes in this sequence. Do, have, be. So get a good job, go to school, do. So you can, what can you have? Get a degree or get a good job, be. And then the last thing is then you'll be successful, right? Go to school, get a good job, be successful. Find a partner, do all this stuff, be charming, learn, blah, blah, blah. So you can get a good partner and then you can be happy. You can be fulfilled, blah, blah, blah. The natural order of human thinking goes do, have, and be. I could give lots of examples. I won't for the sake of time, but that framework, which is 100% natural, like people can't avoid it. That's like gravity for human beings, is I am what happened. I am what the doing and the having produced. Like my identity is dependent upon what I did and what I have. And just think about it. If you're listening to this, it's a very risky bet because it's all about my effort or other people's effort. And if I got the thing or didn't get the thing, this is why people, when they
all out there
finally hit the jackpot, they are still as miserable as they were the next day.
Yeah.
They still are.
Because it's all out there.
It's all out there, right?
Yeah.
So our invitation to folks is to flip this equation where it starts with being, and then out of being is doing, and out of doing is having. Now, so I'm talking back to what I was saying earlier about the stand. Like, what am I committed to? Who am I? That's up for grabs for every human being in every second of the day. Who am I? What am I? And I say, who I am is what I'm committed to. So where I'm headed is who I am. What my convictions are, what my values are in action, like what my, what promises I make, what requests I make, that generates who I am. And I think that's the best news because then I can fully divorce myself from my history. because all of us have some black splotches in our history. And we do know that what I did 5 years ago doesn't matter today anyway. I could have been an all-star in the boardroom 5 years ago, and today I'm shaking in my boots. So we know that that's the way it works for us as humans. But we can always just make this decision about who I am despite circumstances. Dan Tacchini, my business partner that I've mentioned before on the last podcast, he always says a person with a vision can never be held hostage by circumstance, which I think is a very powerful frame. So if I am my vision, and I say we always are, we are our vision for the future, then out of that will overflow, naturally generate doing, because activity comes out of commitment and conviction. And so if I am this thing, no matter what, and I could be delusional. Like if I said I'm an NBA star, obviously I'm an idiot. But if I'm convicted around my passions and my character, my integrity, all that, I can live that out no matter what I'm doing. And so my doing is going to come out of my being, and then I'm going to get. If I do those things right, results just happen. They do. The have happens. Most people are grinding themselves up with the doing and desperate for the having, and then they're just nothing. They're like a ghost hoping to get filled in the previous framework. And now if I'm substantial, if I'm being because I say so, now I think that's coming from like my spiritual background, I think that's a birthright. From my worldview, which I'm a God guy, I believe in all that. And, even the old Jewish scriptures, the first time a human, not the first time. One of the most telling moments in all of the Jewish scripture is when Moses is talking to this burning bush, which is a really fascinating metaphor, and asks God his name. And God says, "Tell them I am who I am." We could talk about that for 5 hours. What the heck does that mean? What it does mean is that God himself is being. Yeah. And we are made in the likeness of God if you keep following those Jewish scriptures. So I think that's our spiritual birthright. I think it's what we're all desperate for, is that I am the choices I make. Yeah. Like I am what I decide I am.
Without the explanation. What I love about that one, by the way, is
that's right.
It's like there's no explanation. He just said I am.
No.
Who do I tell him who sent me? Tell him I am sent you.
Boom.
It's like done.
That's it. Done. And we're all, I remember a moment with several of my clients, one in particular, and she is a rock star leader, founder of a huge company, and she was up against it with her board. And the moving point for her when she took a stand for this company was, this is what I want, and it's just because I say so. This is why. And that's it. And was unapologetic about it. And she just finally stood in her own power, her own identity, her own conviction, and made a move. And that made a big difference for her. It was like the heavens opened up for her in that moment. It was like, hold on, I can just decide. Yep, I can just decide. Nobody else gets to decide who I am. I get to decide who I am. Now, it's good to get feedback and all that so I can learn and always be sharpening the saw and such, but I can just be convicted. So back to your being question, that's what we're all searching for. We just look at it in a very convoluted way naturally. It's not like anybody's doing it wrong. We've been wired this way, I think, by society, and it's affirmed a lot socially. And the counterintuitive and much more courageous stance is just, I am who the heck I say I am. And you're going to lose a lot of people if you do that. Yeah. Because people won't agree with you, or they want to keep you down out of their own jealousy or their own envy. And they won't, it's dangerous to decide that I get to decide. And some people don't want that. Some people want to be sheep, being herded around and doing this and that, or just be a victim, or have any kind of story like that's very PC these days around the worst thing to do on the planet is to offend someone. And so you have to mitigate all your language just to make sure you never step on anybody's toes, all that kind of stuff, which is usually just virtue signaling around cowardice. You got to just say what you think with love and conviction, but also just say what you think. Like that's what the world needs. So so it all comes down to a being conversation, but a certain conversation about being. And that's really what our work's about, is helping people see the possibility in that, and then to practice, stand in that, and then see what happens. And great stuff happens.
So how does that, okay. So I love this. This is awesome. And in a business, you're dealing with a leader, like you use that example with this lady, and she takes a stand and she says, this is who I'm choosing to be. This is what I want. And now there is an organization around her. Right. How do you, practically speaking, help her to also lead the organization in that vision, because you're going to have people that are also going to want to take stands and all of that going on, right? There's a lot,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on. And then where does strategy and all the doing come into this?
Yeah. Well,
Because I'm just thinking that those are the conversations going on. Yeah, but what am I supposed to do?
Right.
Again, always back to that conversation, right?
Yeah. Okay. So there's lots to this answer. So I would first off, if you're committed, and I'll put these conversations together, if you're committed to being responsible. So I'm not just going to CIM something as if that doesn't matter. Of course it matters. And it's got repercussions. So if you're standing there as who you say you are, and you're responsible for the future of this organization, then naturally you must create strategy. Right? Otherwise you're just going to be delusional and be some kind of crazy founder person. There's plenty of those, but you're responsible to get people in the room, first off, to be really clear about the strategy. And for most people, it's around getting great strategic people around them to help them generate that vision. So you need to be responsible for strategy. So you're not just on another planet, right? You got to be here, yes, live in your vision, but yes, live on Earth at the same time. That's this natural tension. This paradox. It's like I'm in the future and I'm in the present. I am looking for possibilities and I'm taking on a risk and I'm analyzing all the pitfalls simultaneously. And so these are some paradoxes to dance in. So if I'm doing that, there's a couple things here. One is everyone always is in a conversation about the corporate vision, and they're in a conversation about their personal vision. That's always happening. Always. That they have a view about where the company needs to go, and they have a view about who they are and how that matters to them, and if they've got relevance to that, and if they're aligned with that or not, and if this is a healthy spot for them, blah, blah, blah. They're always in that conversation. Even if that conversation is very muted for them, that's the way they're in the conversation. So if someone gets convicted about the future and states a personal conviction and a future conviction, and you're the boss, that's great. It's good for them to know exactly where you are. Now, most people don't, because that will naturally generate distinction on the team. And they don't want to deal with the quote unquote conflict of having that distinction on the team. But great leaders will generate the distinction, because then it's going to, metaphorically, I say, just turn the lights on in the room. Like, what are we really doing here? Where am I as a leader? What am I committed to as a leader? And get really clear on that. And where are we going as long as this is my company? Get that clear. Now, but I would then dance in those two things. And it's good to both see them as distinct, corporate vision, personal vision, and see how they're aligned. Most people don't have that conversation, which is like, okay, I'm in this convo, 5 or 6 conversations fly through my head right now about clients I've got right now where the corporate vision maybe has shifted, and I was talking to a VP of blah, 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 and they think, we're not doing what we used to do. And my only thing to him is, go have the conversation, man. Go find out if your suspicion around the future is true or not. And then you get to decide, but go explore first, like open-handedly, like really reflective and generous. And hey, it seems like we're going here now instead of going here. I was really in the other thing, and it seems like we're going this way. Do you think we're going that way? And if they are, then you've got a choice to make. Either I can align with that, or I got to get out. Or I guess you plan C, which a lot of people do, which is not be aligned with that and just complain. But life's short. So I would invite people to get really clear on what's wanted and needed from me, or maybe from the organization, for me to get aligned. Maybe I need additional resources. Maybe I need to go back to the original planning process. Maybe I need to re-articulate myself and what my purpose is and my job description is, if we're going this way or not. There's lots of conversations there. Or maybe it's just time. You know what? I served this organization for a while, and now if we're going this way, God bless you, I don't want to go that way. I'm going to go do this thing. And so I need to go find a team that's headed where I want to head. So you need to, as a leader, illuminate those distinctions for people. And if you do it well, power will come out of that. Alignment will come out of that. Camaraderie will come out of that. Also, some people will now not be on the team anymore, probably. And that's hard, quote unquote, but it's good. Because you'll save yourself long-term, struggle and headache if you have those conversations now. So it's deep. It's a deep conversation. It's a personal conversation that most people want to hide behind their busyness and say, oh, I'll get to that when I have time, or we'll do that at the review 8 months from now. which is always a mistake because I don't know anybody that does a review process that likes it, so they usually kind of mail it in for that. But that's, so a check-in around, if you're clear on those things, check in with people. Hey, do you first off, do you like this vision? Do you like where we're going? Do you agree with it? Those are good questions to ask, really open-handed questions. See where people are, get their expertise on the table and their wisdom on the table. I think it's great if people have been with you for 6 months, a year, 5 years. Hey, do you still want to be here? Are you as passionate today about this as you were when you signed up? And most people won't ask that because they're afraid of the answer if it's like a negative answer. So they'll just avoid that, but they'll avoid it at their own peril. Definitely avoid it at their own stress, avoid it at their own loss of money, income, time, energy, all those types of things. They like to pay the price for not dealing with reality instead of getting reality on the table and seeing how to, integrate these things. So I don't know if I answered your question well, but that's the distinction in which I'd go dance in. Most people don't like to have it. If they get us involved, we have it right away.
Well, you talk about alignment. A lot of times I think the conversation around alignment within organizations is actually conformity. We want you to conform to what it is that we want you to do. And you get a lot of people, and Dan Tacchini was the first one who I heard this term, and I think the only one I ever heard this term used like this, which is cordial hypocrisy. It's being this saying, oh yeah, that sounds great, and going outside the door and saying, well, he's an idiot, or I don't agree with that, whatever. And having those side conversations, which then obviously affect the organization substantially, and also yourself, because it comes back to the integrity. I'm not being true to myself. I'm not being in integrity with myself if I'm saying yes and I really mean no. So very powerful. Yeah.
Cordial hypocrisy, or the corporate nod, where they're nodding at you and flipping you off internally.
Yeah, I'm nodding to you. I'm nodding to you.
Yeah, I'm acting.
But I really am agreeing with you.
That's a great idea, Tom. Get out in the hallway like, Tom's such an idiot. Man, what's he thinking? The risk of that is really your soul, meaning, there's an old Jewish scripture. I'm doing a lot of Jewish scripture today. Not even a Jewish guy, but this old, I guess it's a proverb that a bitter root defiles many. And so if I become bitter, and if I become resentful, and if I become and out of that comes gossip and slander and all these types of things, then I will be defiled, and I will actually defile other people, right? That spreads virally. And we know what that's like. If you've been in organizations that people just talk trash all the time, it is a negative, it's toxic, and they're always blaming someone else for it. So you'll defile your own soul, and, and it's really common. So people act like it's just normal. That's part of a job these days. I don't think it is.
Well, and I think that's why in society, you alluded to it, in society, this is rampant. This is across the board. And it's being encouraged, especially over the last few years, it's being encouraged. And so we wonder why people are uninspired and lacking confidence and doing all sorts of things and confused about their identity. It all comes down to this. So really, really good. So you mentioned about, this is powerful. And you mentioned a story about, or alluded to, this double life that you had. And just for us to be able to, for our listeners to be able to get to know you a little bit, Adrian, and how you got to this revelation, this understanding, along with, of course, the learning and the training that you have. But there's this personal experience that you have viscerally with this for you to be so passionate about this. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Well, let's see. Let me share the short version of it, and we can double click on anything you want. I was in the middle of a career transition. I'd just gotten married. It was a couple years into marriage, and I was in the middle of a career transition as well. And I was quite victimized, meaning I was playing the victim in my marriage, essentially. We're 2 years in, things were going okay. She started to really struggle. I slowly, and then all at once, realized how much I was upset about all those things. And at least in my mind, as I tell myself the story now, I was doing the best I could to get her up and going and all these types of things. And a handful of out of respect for her, I won't share the details, but she was really struggling, I would just say. And then I started struggling with her struggling. And, there's part of a notion in there for me. It's like, oh, no, this is the prime of my life. I'm going up into the right, and she seems to not be going up into the right. This isn't what it's supposed to be like. and slowly grew all this victim story. I had just shifted careers and moved out of being a pastor, which is like, in the limelight, and it's a big church and lots of opportunity, and being a person that a couple thousand, 3,000 people depended on. And I was in that kind of quote unquote moral leadership role in the spotlight. And I just shifted, and I'd shifted into a much more private sector job, and made a whole lot more money, and had a lot more influence, i.e. a lot of money I was shepherding at the time. And so it was fueling up my ego as well, because I was like now a big shot in some regard, at least in my own mind. And it was so. People wanted the money I was responsible for. And, I started drinking. And to deal with that tension. I think, I probably wanted to do that, but I couldn't in that previous role. And I started drinking. And that grew pretty quickly. I mean, I have a pretty pedal down mentality in life, period. What if I'm going to do something, I'm going to go all in, not kind of naturally.
I'm an extremist.
And it's a lot more fun that way. I'm an extremist for sure. Yeah. And so I didn't drink a little, I drank a lot and enjoyed it. And, it was medicine for my own despair, really, about life not going the way I wanted to go. Some aspects it was going great. Some aspects it wasn't going great. Really, the things that were closest to me weren't going well. Externals were looking good. And drank. And then, got further and further from my wife emotionally, and felt really alone. Partially my doing, partially her doing. And I felt really alone. And then, welcome to lots of long nights of drinking. First moment of infidelity happened. I chose that. It's not like it happened. I chose that. And slowly, and then all of a sudden, and that broke the seal on that. And then I went through about a 5-year period of me living this lifestyle of having this kind of external view Adrian and an internal Adrian. Internal Adrian is really sad, despairing, lots of privacy, lots of secrets. Several, not like I had like a one gal who was like a fling. No. It was, pedal down. So it was like lots of travel and all that kind of thing. So, and I was so numbed out and I kept telling myself that, not hurting anybody, nobody really knows, and I lived in that, like, if nobody knows, it's not a big deal. And I realized later, I knew. And so I didn't dare tell the truth. I didn't dare be honest for fear of repercussions. So anyway, I lived 5 years really in this dark, duplicitous life, thousands of lies I was telling other people, and myself, and, ended up really, crushing her. Obviously, when I told her the truth, I ended up finally wrecking a car, being drunk. I drove all the time, and finally crashed a car. And I say finally, like it was a gift to me, because it was. Nobody else was hurt. I had stitches in my face, but I was desperate for it, desperate for help. And I being an extremist, needed to thank God I didn't hurt anybody. And then it opened up a brand new conversation like an honest conversation about how I was really doing. Partially also being the helper guy. Like I just needed a lot of help, and I was unwilling to ask for help out of pride, out of habit for sure. And I needed a lot of help. And so finally I got help, and I entered the rooms of AA and all the things that I think wise people do. And so as of end of August, I'm 7 years sober. I don't drink anymore and all that. And I don't womanize like that anymore. Awesome. I use other people and use myself in that way. So yeah, it was really dark and very criminal, right? Like hiding money, stealing money from my family, it was dark, like using people, using myself, all very deplorable stuff, very sad stuff that you'd never want to share in public. Like that's all things that happened. I lived in such a shame about it, which was my own way to protect myself from it instead of just like talk about it. And finally started talking about it and realized, yes, it was true. Most people would go away, and they did. And I earned it, right? There was a mass exodus in my life because I'd been lying and been living a double life. And so in a human way, people walked away. The marriage ended. Most people walked away. But the great friends stayed. People who knew their own dark side, could hug the cactus, as we talked about in the previous, like know their own criminality. And that's the thing. That's, I think, why I can go into any conversation with anybody, just because there's really nothing they're doing that I would be shocked by. There's nothing they're doing that I would have massive judgment of. Not that I would think it's foolish and they ought to change their mind, but nothing I'm going to judge them for. Like, because it's their behavior and it's a whole framework about what's justifying the behavior. That's what's toxic, not them as a person. I think we're all born amazing and beautiful and crafted for being a gift to the world. So anytime we're off from that, we're just off of our original way of being. That I think we're, I'm a God guy, so I think we're crafted that way. Yeah. So for good, and not just trying not to be evil. No, I think we're actually a force of good. So I can be really disarming and really dangerous in that way, because whatever is toxic, I'm down for it. Let's talk about it. And it's shocking to them about that I can be with them in a way that's non-judgmental. It's like, and times I'll share that within my story. Most of my clients know an aspect of that story, and I share that in order to build some camaraderie and show humility and watch how to be with my own dark side without living in the shame about it, which is really powerful. If you can, like,
there's freedom in that.
There's freedom in that. It's like, there's no, open up my closet. I'll give you the tour. Like, no big deal. Look at all that. Look what I did. And now look who I am now. Look where I am now. Proud of the decisions I'm in right now. Proud of how I'm being in the world now. And it just is what it is. And so I can now be committed to what's next. And I've got a whole lifestyle of sobriety now and live in recovery and do all that kind of stuff. And it's still involved in the AA program. Was just on a call this morning and sponsor a bunch of guys, helping give them the hope I needed, 8 years ago, that I was scared to death. So if anytime anybody has a notion towards nobility, I'll meet them right there, because that takes courage to, like, tell the truth and live in the truth. And that is the main sign of vitality, I think, is people's willingness to claim and live in what's true. So that's wow. Kind of the big picture story of what I did, what I created for myself, and quote unquote what happened. But it's really I happened, and I was confused.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. And I think there's so many of us that I know for myself. I remember somebody saying to me, it was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago, 10 years ago. And I'm going through this, what you're talking about, but being on the other side of it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I don't want to talk about it because I don't even know how to process this. Right. And I remember somebody on social media, Facebook, was saying, "Oh man, your life is so amazing." I'm like, you have no idea,
right?
Respectfully, what's going on.
Right.
And then I realized part of that was my responsibility. And some of it I didn't need to share. Right. It's not necessarily something that I need to share on Facebook.
Right.
And I realized that because I wasn't sharing how I was feeling or what was real, like really going on for me, I gave the illusion, right, of having it all together.
Yeah.
And created distance. And so as soon as I started to open up about it and started to talk about some of the things I was dealing with, from being responsible for it and where my contribution was to it, and what I was doing about it, then I created this space for others to be able to share what was going on with them. And it was so freeing. And I remember at one point, my husband, I don't know if I told you this story, but my husband and I, we did end up getting divorced, and we actually got remarried now last year. It's been a year and 18 months. Awesome. And, but I remember the time when he said to me, the point when he said to me, "I hope you can forgive me." And I said, "Dude, I've already forgiven you. In fact, thank you, because of what this whole experience did for me was it opened me up, right? It showed me where I didn't really love myself, where I didn't fully accept myself, because I let you, or I saw you as the person who was actually either giving me value or not. You were the one that was determining that for me at that time in my mind. And I realized that it didn't matter what you said or did or didn't say or didn't do or whatever. It was about what I believed to be true about myself. And so it was just this huge shift. And then being able to realize, like, to your point about not being judgmental, is, I realized before then I was kind of judgmental. I remember many years ago saying to somebody, "Oh, I would never marry somebody who was divorced because I don't want all they're already messed up or whatever by somebody else." Sure. No, I married somebody who was divorced multiple times and then got divorced and went through that whole process. But it was this process that was pride.
Yes.
And I was humbled in that process and realized that how judgmental I really was and how that was limiting me. I was judgmental towards me. I was judgmental towards others, towards him, and I remember at one point, I was saying to God, I was like, God, like, how do I forgive him for all the things that he's done? And he said, well, I mean, you've committed adultery. You've been unfaithful to me.
Mm-hmm.
You've been unfaithful to me. How often have you put something before me?
Mm-hmm.
How often have you prioritized work before me? How often have you, prioritized another relationship before me?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
And I forgive you.
Yeah.
And it was like, wow. So there's so much freedom in that conversation to be able to have that conversation with others, because we bottle this stuff up and we're like, can't show anybody, can't tell anybody what's really going on. That shame keeps us in a prison. And that's really what you're talking about is being able to put that out there, being able to experience that freedom, being fully alive. I was journaling about that this morning. Man, people just want to feel fully alive.
Mm-hmm.
What does it take to be fully alive, right? Is to let go of the things that imprison us.
Yes. The story comes to mind, the story about Jesus, where it's like, it's the woman who gets caught doing adultery, right? They bring her out and, they're going to line up and throw rocks at her, right? That's what they did back in the day.
Yeah.
And Jesus, being the very counterintuitive leader he was, stepped up and just said that simple question, or I guess it's a statement: let he who is without sin throw the first stone. So he's just like, okay, great. This works. Wonderful. Have justice this way if you like. The only criteria is if you're perfect, then you get to throw a stone.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget, I noticed that it's the young men walked away first. It's the older men that went last. And I think that's fascinating. Like, if we've lived in this story for a long time, the young guys were like, oh yeah, I'm an idiot. Sorry. Put that rock down. But it's the old ones, the ones that are really full of pride and really full of their own image of themselves and their own reputation. It takes them longer to let loose of the stones. And she had done wrong and whatever. But the guy who could have judged the crap out of her said, no. Once you're perfect, then you can start judging other people. But that day's never coming either. So why don't you get off the whole, I need to make them worse so I feel better about myself, which I think is where most of that comes from. It's a comparison conversation. Yeah. That's heroic. If you walked into that, I mean, if you've been cheated on and been betrayed, most people will not say, how did I contribute to this? Most people will not do that. And to their own peril, to their own lack of vitality, for sure. Instead of saying, because I knew, and I don't know if we'll ever have this conversation with my ex-wife, because she knew, right? She knew all along the way. And there was lots, because I had made some mistakes running that con, and I'd lied about it. But I was, had become pretty good at deceiving. But there's lots of stuff that she knew, and she just didn't want to know, right? And so she'd avoided it. And so that's a part of her. Not that there's no blame in this conversation, but even for her own integrity, it's like she knew. She didn't want to talk about it either. Neither did I. For obvious reasons. Neither did she, for obvious reasons. So it could have been a really great place to connect about what do we do about our own fallings? What do we do about our own failures? And can we connect in those? Or can we do what ended up happening? And this isn't, she did anything wrong. It's great. And I'm happy and I've moved on. But for other people, it's like, if you've been betrayed, it's worthy to, and we've all got these, we're giving an extreme example here, but there's always opportunity to say, what did I do? Let me imagine there's ways in which I contributed to this. And even my silence is a contribution. And if I can own that, then I'm much less apt to spend my time judging them and making myself better than them. And I can actually heal and seek forgiveness, which, wow, wouldn't that be a crazy thing? Like, seek forgiveness for how I betrayed them by not being honest with them about their betrayal. Because I think that's as much of a vow as anything else. So, when we stand up there and say, I do, what do we say I do to? We say I do to our own integrity and our own partnership to do it. And if I knew someone was struggling, even in a way that really would hurt me if it was so, that's also my responsibility. So that's courageous that you stood in there and had those types of conversations with yourself about it. And that's probably why you were able to remarry him and start fresh and not like start without that happening. You're actually wiser now with that happening, and you know how to care for him more, know probably what his proclivities might be or whatever his da-da-da, and all the dynamics that led into that. And now you can start new, even though the old didn't have to go away to be new. Like I
Yeah.
can start fresh here with a lot more wisdom, a lot more care, a lot more concern, a lot more self-worth. Sounds like for you, you were able to put him in the right place in your own hierarchy of who you listen to in life. And it sounds like God is for you utmost. And what a beautiful recalibration. That's what responsibility does. It helps us calibrate with reality in the most meaningful and effective way.
Yeah. Well, it was a gift. I mean,
Yeah.
it really, really was. Otherwise,
Isn't that
I'd
cool?
continue to be imprisoned, right? And
Yes.
when I discovered and took responsibility, and discovered my role in it, then and I understood, and then I could, when I settled that, then I could look at him honestly
Mhm.
and say, what's going on? And
Mhm.
to your point we were talking about earlier about the why, not digging too much into the why, but
Yeah.
seeking to understand and go back and go, that makes sense. In
Makes
fact,
sense.
if I had had that same experience, I might have done the same thing.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
That's a powerful discipline for folks that are listening to this. If you're still listening, hi. Um, if you've got some kind of favorite villain in your life, a great exercise is to really empathize with them, which is not to agree with them or not to anything like that, but like be them for a minute, see the world as they see it,
Hmm.
and wonder how they can make those connections with that experience and where they are and how this would make sense to them, even though it might be foolish and hurtful and da 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 da. But how might you have made the same decision? That's a powerful exercise. If you've got the courage to do it, most people don't have the courage to do it because we're busy being the hero in our own story and there's villains out there. But if you actually become the villain, and as a discipline and understand the villain, you're definitely more likely of having a full life because you aren't living scared
Mhm.
all the time.
Yeah.
I have this 16-year-old stepson who just texted me today. He's in high school, and he just texted me saying, he's been in this relationship, and he says, I still can't trust this girl. And I said, no, 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 no. You can trust her. You just don't know what to do with your feelings of insecurity. Because you're liable to get hurt, and you will get hurt, and she'll do things that hurt your feelings. And you want to imagine there's a world in which you don't have those feelings of insecurity. That's not coming. Love requires insecurity. Love requires vulnerability. Now, you can still trust her with your eyes open. Like, be clear about that. Give her your trust. You're opening yourself up to being hurt, but that's what makes life worth it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, something like that.
This is great.
Yeah.
This is great. Adrian,
Thanks for asking
thank
about
you.
that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
And we're talking about hugging the cactus. You can't talk about it just in theory. We got to
Yeah.
be open about it. And yeah, it's good. It's good. Well, where do people go to find out more about you, connect with you, more of the work that you're doing? And if
Sure.
somebody's listening to this and they're saying, I need to have more of these conversations, how do they do that?
Yeah. Well, an easy place to find me is on Instagram. So Adrian.K is where I post a bunch of stuff like this, like when I'm talking on podcasts and such, and people can DM me directly and we'll talk. If they want to learn about the firm, takenewground.com is the firm. We've got, if you're running a company, we work almost solely with founder driven organizations. So if you're one of those people, let's have a conversation. If you're just if you need help, we'll love to help you. And either be a resource to you, somebody on my team, or get you connected to the right resources. If you're like in a challenge, in a crossroads in life or whatever, you probably need a lot more help than you want. Come on, get some help. And we promise to be there for you as a fierce advocate for you. We've got public trainings too. We've got one coming up that'll probably be done by the time this is posted, called the Revenant Process. We have another one coming up in February that I think you might come to, Nicole, which would be amazing.
Yeah. That's in Boise, Idaho, I believe,
Boise,
right?
Idaho.
Yeah.
Rock and roll. Yep.
Yeah.
Boise, Idaho in November. WeAreRevenant.com. We've got other stuff. We have lots of things. So you just go check that out. And most importantly, just reach out and let's have a conversation about where you are and where you want to go and what your challenges are. And I promise you, I'll help you find the right resources.
Fantastic. Thank you, Adrian. This has been awesome.
You're awesome,
And,
Nicole. Thanks for having me on again.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. It was a pleasure. So for our listeners, I always say that leaders of transformation take action. Take action on something. Don't get busy in it. That don't misunderstand me and get back in the doing. Look at maybe that action is looking at yourself in the mirror, and who are you choosing to be, and taking responsibility for where you are, and taking responsibility for where you want to be, where you choose to be, and be committed to that. And so we'd love to hear your stories, how this has impacted you. You can go on leadersoftransformation.com, or you can find us on social as well. And we look forward to hearing from you. We also look forward to having you join us next time for another episode of the Leaders of Transformation. Have a great day.